Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This one is going to be my review for The Mandalorian Season 2 Episode 4, overall Chapter 12, The Siege. And yeah, another really good episode. Obviously, this one didn't immediately follow up on let's go to see Ahsoka, but it made sense. Obviously the ship was damaged, that needs to be repaired before we can go out to where Ahsoka is, and they did get that accomplished by the end of this episode, and also added on a couple of extra bits and pieces to the plot in addition to just the general kind of lore information about what's going on here with the child, what the Empire are doing. We're now finally starting to see some of those sort of connections of the Mandalorian explaining some of the things that go on in the sequel trilogy. So that's kind of interesting. So yeah, let's get into it. So this episode we see the Mandalorian return to Navarro. So we get to meet Cara Dune again, Greef Karga, as well as the Mythrol, which was kind of interesting. They didn't give him a name, and they seemed to just name him his species. And I actually had to look it up and kind of be like, wait, that is the name of his species, right? And I believe it is, but they also just call him that. So I don't know if it just so happens that that happens to be his name, or we don't actually know his name and they just call him by his the name of his species, which seems a little weird given that he is a character in this episode, returning from episode 1 of The Mandalorian. And yeah, I thought he was kind of fun as just a guy to sort of, order around a lot, and do his usual thing of, like, he ends up speaking quite a lot, but everyone is just very dismissive of everything he says. But he seems, relatively capable, so it created a kind of fun dynamic where you had our, kind of three main hero characters, the Mandalorian, Cara Dune, and Greef, and then just with them for support was the bounty from the very first episode. And, they gave him a little bit of a backstory by kind of establishing that he's been working with Greef Karga for years, since he was young, basically. But he did some, fancy accounting and obviously got himself some money. And because of that, that's how he ended up being on the run and in the situation from the very first episode. So I do appreciate what they overall did with the kind of reintroduction of the character. There was a lot of fun Baby Yoda, the child stuff in this episode that I really liked. The Baby Yoda playing with wires, the Mandalorian trying to use him to actually repair the ship. I thought it was just a fun scene of just like, okay, 2 wires, just basically swap places, and the steps that the Mandalorian has to go through to try and get across to Baby Yoda what is going on here. Just take that one, put it there, take this one, put it there, don't let them touch. And of course, it all builds up to a relatively long scene to Baby Yoda putting the 2 wires together and electrocuting himself. And it's just like, there it is, the end of the show, Baby Yoda has died. But no, it's just a kind of fun joke that he gets minorly shocked by the ship here, as the Mandalorian reveals, basically. He can't use Baby Yoda to repair the kind of smaller parts of the ship, but it was worth a try. Very fun scene, but for the most part, most of the episode, we leave Baby Yoda this time at the school on Navarro. So he gets to sit up front. Obviously, it doesn't seem like he's aware of necessarily what's going on, and is immediately more entranced by what the person sitting next to him is eating. And so there's this whole sort of plot going on with Baby Yoda wanting the blue biscuits, whatever you want to call them, that the kid next to him had, and in the end stealing them with the Force, and then it coming full circle at the end of him eating these biscuits the whole time. But because the Mandalorian is doing fancy flying on the Razor Crest, Baby Yoda ends up getting sick right at the end. And so it's just a fun little, like, okay, full story on the Baby Yoda eating sort of style plot. Because, like, they've kind of emphasized that quite a lot over these episodes, just him eating stuff. But, they had a little bit of variety here with the scene with the wires at the start. So, fun use of him. I completely expect we'll see some sort of, Funko Pop of Baby Yoda with wires or Baby Yoda with blue biscuits or something like that announced in the coming days, given how the merchandising is going so far with The Mandalorian. But yeah, the mission in this episode is to basically shut down the final Imperial base on Navarro, and if they do so, Navarro is sort of free from control everywhere else. They can really use it and its interesting position in the galaxy to be a sort of trade hub for this section of the sector, and Greef Karga and Cara Dune have really sort of shaped Navarro into something new and different. It's not just sort of a home for bounty hunters or anything like that anymore. They're actually making it into a kind of place you would want to live. And I kind of like the position that they were both in, of like Greef Karga is actually running it well, and Cara Dune is kind of liking her position as the Marshal. So that all worked well to kind of establish why they're invested in getting rid of the Empire, not for any other kind of real reasons, just because they like living here and they want to make it better. And so the Mandalorian gets involved, and the deal ends up basically being, we'll repair your ship for free if you help us with this. Kind of what's been going on more or less all season. We just pretty much get to the Imperial base. There's a lot of action sequences going on here, of just defeating stormtroopers in different hallways, but the core result of this, and I thought what made it more interesting, was more that you did get to see them ordering around Mithral, and just especially some of the references that, like, when they had to turn the kind of cooling section off, because it's the base sort of is related to like the lava fields, which obviously relate to like was it the second last or the last episode of season 1? So we know there's lava fields on Navarro, and they have to turn the cooling fields off to sort of destroy the base. And to do so, they have to do it in a similar way to shutting down the tractor beams on the Death Star, if I remember correctly, of like the weird platforms of like the controls are on like the outside of this platform that doesn't have a guardrail that Obi-Wan had to walk around on, and in this case the Mithral had to do. So it just highlights the crazy, dangerous working environment on a lot of Imperial facilities here. But surprisingly, none of our heroes were killed in this episode. I was worried throughout a lot of this episode that at some point someone's going to get shot, someone's going to get taken out, because Mithral is like, okay, returning character from the first episode, but he's not super important, so they could theoretically kill him off. And then the show is sort of in that mode where, yes, it can at the same time be like really, really important at times, but then at times not feel important. They could at any time decide to just, we're taking things to the next level, let's kill a main character off. And so in that sense, like, especially right at the end when we got to the scene where like the Mandalorian left on his own, leaving the other 3 to escape on that transport, and just the sequence of like how long it took them to take out one TIE fighter. The second they got out onto the flat ground and there was basically no cover for them, and against 3 TIE fighters, I was convinced they were going to do like a Queel type thing on this and kill one or all of these characters potentially to set the plot into motion of like the Mandalorian wanting revenge against sort of Gideon for what happened. But no, surprisingly, everyone survives. The Mandalorian went back to get the ship, and in the ship he takes out the TIE fighters. But the key thing here is that, look, they succeed in taking out the base, but what the information they discover in the base about what the base was, it wasn't like a military base, it was a lab facility where specifically they were doing research into basically growing beings and implanting Force-sensitive blood into them was basically the idea here. And I think the main thing was that they went back to a lot of the early episodes of like, why did the Empire like have the child and what were they using him for? They were using the child's blood to perform these experiments because, as they say in the episode here, Dr. Pershing on the Hollow says we don't have like another subject with a high M count. So midichlorian count is clearly what they're talking about here. And of course we know the child is force sensitive, so that would explain the high midichlorian count. And so high midichlorian count means that you are likely to have contact with the force. So it makes sense that that's what they're going for here, because this is Snoke's setup, basically. That's, in my mind, what they're doing here. This is meant to be the sort of origin of the research into the, Palpatine clones, or the bodies that Palpatine can puppet from the sequel trilogy. Again, is it the best thing that the sequel trilogy did? Perhaps not. But I'm okay with the Mandalorian including answers that make sense to come out in or around this sort of time period. To me, once they don't, I think, delve overly heavily into sequel era stuff, I'm pretty okay in that. I suspect we will at some point see the First Order properly get mentioned, and maybe see the origin, them really begin to stand out as like an entity to themselves and not just the remnants of the Empire. But that was definitely like just an important scene to get across, of like, finally, after so many episodes, it's not just get the child back to where he belongs, it's also what were they doing with the child in the first place? How did they know this information? Where did they get him from? There's still many, many questions. Because again, like, you almost forget, the child's meant to be 50 years old, according to what they say. And they know for sure he's force sensitive because they know about the high M count. And that's what they're using to make these experiments that are going wrong. And at least one of them definitely looked sort of like Snoke. They definitely masked it in sort of shadow and darkness, so you couldn't really see. But you definitely got a sort of Snoke-style look, and it gets across that, okay, Snoke is this genetically sort of engineered being, and I guess he is the end result of a lot of this experimentation. So I guess at some point they might get the child back, or find someone else who's force sensitive to get the blood from to actually do this, or they'll find some sort of other path. But it is revealed that Moff Gideon is behind this project, and that Dr. Pershing was reporting to him. The Mandalorian also at this point finds out that Moff Gideon is actually alive, which sets up the whole idea that one of the people who helped to repair the Razor Crest put a tracking beacon on it, and at the very end of this episode, it is reported to Moff Gideon that they have found the Razor Crest. So as the Mandalorian is making his way to find Ahsoka, he is being tracked by the Empire, and the twist right at the end is that, okay, Moff Gideon is directly on the trail of the Mandalorian, but now he knows that the child is with him, so he can potentially get the child back. But also he has this full room filled with what looks like, I guess it's going to be Death Trooper or Dark Trooper set up here at the end. The crazy black armor that they had going on there. Again, I forget what is and is not canon with regards to this stuff, but Dark Troopers are definitely a thing that has been present in Star Wars. I don't think there's a lot canon-wise about it, but this seems to be what they're doing here. These don't seem like Death Troopers, which we've kind of seen before. This, I'm guessing, is going to be something that will more counter like a Mandalorian. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see sort of the Empire at their best. I'm kind of interested to know, potentially, will they bring in the idea of sort of like the Mandalorian connection, in that, like, I'm wondering, is there like an element of like Beskar to any of that armor? That would be just a kind of cool thing to show that the Empire are using what they've taken from the Mandalorian Purge, and it creates a way for you to obviously have opponents to the Mandalorian who have the same level of kind of protection that he does. But some very, very solid setup. I know episode 5, I think we know, is directed by Dave Filoni, which is pretty notable, and everyone expects this to be the episode with Ahsoka, because of course, like, Ahsoka is basically Dave Filoni's character, so why wouldn't he direct her live-action debut? and then just him directing an episode of his own show is a very notable thing. So that would be, pretty high expectations for next week. I do feel they probably have to introduce Ahsoka, and then if they do want to keep her more in the outskirts of the show, it would make sense to have her introduction then be interrupted and immediately separate the Mandalorian and Ahsoka by having Moff Gideon arrive on the scene. That would be probably the best way to do it, because you don't want this show to just become the tie up loose ends from the Clone Wars and Rebels show. It's great that they're using some of that in here, but you don't want that to be the whole show. That episode 1 resolves this, episode 2 resolves this. No, it has to have the plot by itself. And in this case, I think they're still blending it in quite nicely, in that they've held back on Boba Fett for this many episodes so far. We still don't know what's going on there. So I get, the Mandalorian still has Boba Fett's armor, I guess. The other thing is, of course, the Mandalorian is going to find Ahsoka, but it's not necessarily a thing that Ahsoka necessarily becomes a main character in The Mandalorian. It may just be this one scene that it makes the most sense for her to put the Mandalorian onto the next stage of his quest, but Moff Gideon is going to come into play. In that, it would be crazy to me if next week was our first time, I suppose, with the Mandalorian getting to see a lightsaber or the Darksaber, depending on how they go. If we saw Ahsoka take her lightsabers out to defend against Gideon, potentially, if that happens, that's a really cool moment that I'm sort of waiting for. Because, I don't know, will they hold back on, potentially ever having the Mandalorian, hold a lightsaber? I don't know. They probably will. They won't have him, take a weapon, have a lightsaber, but I think it would be cool to just see him, at least in some scene, hold one, even if it's not going to be a weapon he uses regularly. But yeah, that's, I think, most of what I want to talk about with this episode. And I think this was definitely one of the most sort of well-balanced episodes of the season, where it was still sort of a little bit of a side plot, in that the main core of what the episode was about was, I need to get the ship repaired, I'm going to help out Navarro while I'm here. But along the way, there was great humor with a lot of the Baby Yoda stuff, which was very fun. We learned some important information about the child, reintroducing midichlorian count into play, it being a Snoke setup and First Order setup, I guess. And then Moff Gideon is much more heavily brought back into play here. As well as we're immediately, the Razor Crest is fixed. We're heading to Ahsoka, I guess. So it's all there and done. The episode had the pacing it needed to in terms of getting back onto the plot. So yeah, what is it, the best episode of the season? I still like the last episode with the Mandalorians quite a lot, but I think this is probably one of the better ones this season. But I think outside of episode 2, which I thought was a little bit weak, this has been a pretty strong season overall. So they're my thoughts on the episode. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were, but that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.